I'd like at this time go on to our next speaker here, Mike Ross. Uh, as you know, or maybe as you don't know, he's a new beekeeper, but he's also a person who's done a lot of research and development, retired from Aries Magnetic. He's also was a teacher there. He's also a person who raises cattle, uh, if it's a breed that I'm not really that familiar with, Scottish Highland beef cattle. And he's the director at the Waterford Fair Beef Department. He's the chair there. And he has put up a really nice presentation on bear fencing. So, Mike, you're on here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll get started here. What I have learned in about 20 years of keeping beeves, which is a Scottish term for your beef cattle, and I learned uh, pretty quick about a week after we put up a fence and it wasn't electrified that you need to electrify a fence. We were chasing our first two heifers through the woods until we got them back. It was a long day. So we're going to talk about electric fencing, and everybody will do it a little different. And I've seen a couple different ways to do it. Charles, in his background, we saw uh, one type of fence. We'll talk about that. And Robin had a similar but different fence in her bee yards. The thing I learned to keep in were these Scottish Highland. Uh, these are cows. I think this one's a steer back here. You can tell by the horns. But what we all now with bees want to keep out are critters like these, and particularly when they get a little bigger than this, they can get pretty destructive. If there's any questions in between here, please ask as we go. I like questions. Uh, the objective of electric fencing is to keep our critters in or out of an area. You don't want your cows wandering around your neighbor's yards. They don't care for that. And you don't want bears getting into your hives. It's going to be a destructive thing for you, and you're not going to like that. So it's a learning experience. You have to learn how to build your fence to keep them out, and the four-legged critters have got to learn that it hurts to touch that fence. And we like to let our calves out in the spring in a run, which we found early on they would go right through the fence. And then we learned that we electrified that fence. So their first experience with a fence was it would hurt. We'd hear them groan when they touched that wire the first time, and then they stayed away from it. And we had a little chuckle when that happened, but it was a learning experience. It hurts, but we don't want to kill anything. So electric fences and the chargers that you buy nowadays are designed to hurt but not kill anything. Although I wouldn't want to grab a fence if I was standing in the creek or something like that. I don't think that would be a good experience. So the objective here is to have a fence that's going to zap the animal, put a little electric charge into you the first time they touch it. Now, sources of equipment, I found the absolute best source of a variety of equipment. They have a lot of stock. There's a company called Kenco. They're in Indiana, PA, and for all of us, it's UPS shipment within a couple days. They have a lot of stock. They're a good place to go. If you need something today, Tractor Supply, pretty common store all over the place. There's a new store down in Meadville Family Farm and Home that has a supply of electric fencing. And at least in around Erie County, the Erie Crawford Co-op also has a supply of electric fence materials. So, but Kenco, they've got a good website. They've got a nice catalog and good place to work with. Fence chargers. There's three kinds of fence chargers. They run off mains, which is your household power. You plug them into the wall. You probably want to have some kind of a surge suppressor or something like that there. Almost all of them are 110 or 120 volt. You can get very, very large ones that run on 220 volt, like what you plug your dryer into. Probably none of us need anything like that. The solar chargers are really nice because most of our bee yards are nowhere near where we can plug them in. So the solar chargers are probably the ones you want to be considering. They're not as powerful as the ones that run off household power. Robin had one in her picture. We'll see another picture of that as we go in these slides. And you can also run them off of a battery, a deep cycle battery. These are probably the least powerful ones. They kill a battery, they'll ruin a battery. So you got to be running out there and somehow recharging the battery. You can do that with a solar panel. They all end up costing about the same, whether you buy one that runs off household power, solar, or a straight battery. And the solar ones generally have a battery built into the system too, which needs replaced every couple of years. So it doesn't much matter how you do it, they all cost the same. Solar is pretty convenient. Fence construction. I saw Charles, he had a bunch of T-posts in his background, in his image there. Wooden posts are what you are generally see. Everybody's seen cow pastures, and almost all of them have wooden posts. The most of your wooden posts are going to be treated posts. They'll last a long time. Because they're treated, you're not organic, and so I have issues with the organic scheme of things. Although we didn't use a lot of antibiotics, only when they were called for with our cattle, and I have the same philosophy with bees. Steel posts, steel T-posts are good. You can put them in pretty easy. You can get a little pounder, you can use a sledgehammer. The painted ones don't last a whole long time. There are galvanized ones. You can get a Kencove. They're very nice. There's fiberglass posts. There's a variety of fiberglass posts. The thing about fiberglass is they splinter, and you can get glass fibers in your hands. I've had some fiberglass stuff here, and I shy away from that now. There's plastic or composite posts you can get at Kencove. Those are very interesting. We'll be talking more about them before we finish. And the plastic step-in. I saw Robin's bee yards used a lot of the plastic step-in posts. They're not very strong. They're cheap. They're easy. But we use them for cattle to partition large pastures, so you could try and convince the cows to stay in a certain area and graze that area. They were generally considered temporary. The cows considered them somewhat of an inconvenience, and if they didn't want to be where they were, they'd go right through the plastic step-in fences. So I'm not real keen on them. I suppose they're better than nothing, but the ones that work good for you are the wood, the T-post, or the composite post. The downside to the wood or the steel T-posts is you have to have insulators to insulate your hot wires from those posts. Those will conduct electricity. Your fence won't work. The composite fiberglass plastic step-in, those are all pretty nice to use. The wire can be connected to them directly, and they're self-insulating. That's pretty nice. Posts all cost about the same. The wooden T-post and the composite, they're all going to cost you upwards of about $10 a piece. There's different kinds of fence wire you can use. The stuff that I have miles of on the farm here is the high tensile steel wire. And it's the strongest. Nothing's going to break it. Trees can fall on it. Might pull staples out of the posts, but generally speaking, you can't break that wire. It takes some special tools to work with it. Barbed wire, most of us who have been around cattle or walking, seen farms, have seen barbed wire. Barbed wire is effective if you can't get a electric fence run someplace. But as far as barbed wire keeping out of bears will, barrel through, briar patches and stuff like that. They go in there and they sit and they eat blackberries. They're not bothered too much by barbed wire fences. Aluminum wire is a good alternative, but it's not very strong. And it could be used with T-posts or the step-ins. It's not very strong. And one of the things you have to do with these fences is have a tight wire. And it's difficult to achieve that with aluminum wire. I've used a small amount of it in special places, special circumstances. But aluminum wire is easy to work with, but not very strong. Tape or rope fence, there's a variety of different kinds of, we'll call it wire, but uses a fiber tape or a rope, and they weave into it fine wires. And I saw that in at least one of Robin's slides. And that's what we use for temporary fencing. The biggest difficulty I see with that is you can't tension it very well. Again, you need your wire should be tight if you're going to try and keep things out. And making connections, you have to make jumpers between each of the wires on your fence. Probably, I don't know how to do that well. I don't know how you do that. So tape and rope fence, I guess if you loop it back and forth and wind it around all your posts several times, you can make that work. But I'm not sure about that one. Steel panels, as I was researching to do this presentation, and we'll show you later in a slide, I found a article on Kenco's website about using steel panels for making a fence around your bee yard. If you have a small bee yard, like I'll have 3 hives this year, these panels, you can buy them at Tractor Supply and probably in your normal agricultural places. These panels are heavy wire fence sections. They're 16-foot long and generally about 4.5 foot tall. Kenco had their article, and we'll talk a lot about this. I really like this system that they show. Page wire is the last thing. It's what you see around fences. You could call it like chain link fencing or whatnot. It's good for gardens. I don't see that being a really good alternative. It's not going to hold itself up. It's a good fence if you're not electrifying it, but for us to keep bees out of this, or bears out of our bee yard, I don't see how page wire is a good idea. The bears would tear it down. I don't think that's a good one for us. Grounding. What's really important, we call it grounding, but grounding completes the circuit. How many of us took a 9-volt battery as kids, and maybe even not as kids, and stuck it on our tongue, the 9-volt transistor battery? What you did is you took the positive terminal of the battery and connected it to the negative terminal, which is the ground on the battery, and you got a little zap across your tongue. So grounding is absolutely important for making your electric fence work. If you don't have a ground, your fence won't work. There's 2 basic methods to the grounding. You can use an earth method, which is where you drive a galvanized post about 6 foot into the ground, and you connect your ground, your negative terminal of your battery or your charger, your fence charger, to the ground. And that is the way that works is the animal's feet are on the ground and their nose is on the fence and or their shoulder, and the electricity flows through the ground, through their leg, into their nose, and they get zapped and they don't like it. This, for those of us who have worked on car engines and lawnmowers and things like that, if you've ever grabbed your spark plug or the wire and gotten zapped, that's sort of like what you're getting here. That's the way these chargers work. They charge up and then they dump the electricity in a very, very short time to the wire. So it's not a continuous thing like if you grabbed hold of bare wire in your house. The other way to do this, and I really like this, and I've used it a lot on my fences, is a direct connection to the ground. I make every other wire on my fence connected to the ground terminal on the charger. And what that does is that eliminates the necessity for electricity to go through the ground, the earth, through their leg and to their nose. What happens is an animal will put their head through the fence. The distance between the two wires is through their chin and into their nose. So that's a very effective method, particularly when you've got the low power solar type chargers. And you can also do a combination of that where you also use a ground rod driven into the ground, and that works as the earth. This is a picture from the Kenco website. And they have a lot of good information there on the details on how to do a fence. This shows a mains type charger in the building hooked up to the fence. You have to use special insulated wire to go from the positive lead of your charger to your fence. And that's very important. You can't use extension cord or something like that, or even house type wiring. That wiring is typically rated for 300 to 600 volts. What we're talking about here on these fence energizers, to deter a bear, you'd really like to see 6,000 volts. And the better chargers with well isolated will see 9,000 volts, which isn't very high. The new electrical system in cars that run your spark plugs, they're getting upwards of 20 to 30,000 volts. So, you know, we're working in much lower voltage, but you need to have pretty good voltage, or you're not going to deter the animals. And you have to deter them the first time they touch that fence, because once they learn they can go through that fence, it's going to be tough to keep them out. We've had a couple of steers that learned that they could walk through the fence. It was going to bite them, but they could walk through it. So this shows hot wires here. They're connected with a jumper. It shows ground rods. Almost always they recommend 3, but for small yards, you can probably get away with 1 pretty nicely. I've done 1. And if you connect every other wire, and we'll show you in another slide, you connect every other wire, you don't have to worry about the grounding system. These are mains chargers. I've used all of these. Right now I'm using this, and the nice part about this, and Charles, with that big yard you have behind you, if you could use one of these, it's really nice because you can get a remote control for that. As you go around your fence checking the fence, you can turn your charger on and off from a distance. And that's pretty nice, instead of having to have walkie-talkies and somebody unplugging it at the house and forgetting to do it. And then you grab the wire because they got distracted on their phone, and you grab a hot wire and say lots of nasty things. This is a this charger is rated at 1 joule. You'll see these chargers; they'll be rated in different ways: joules and miles of fence. Neither one of them mean a whole lot. You just want the most powerful one you can possibly afford. This is a 13 joule charger, and it disabled my arm for a few seconds after I grabbed the fence accidentally. And this one, I think they rate this one at like 200 miles of fence. So those are all good chargers. This also has one thing that can happen is you can get hit by lightning, uh, and they'll take out your charger. So about every 3 years, you can probably plan on replacing a charger if you've got a lot of electric fence like I have. I saw one of these in the Penn State slides. I still have the second one that I ever got. The first one got hit by lightning about 2 weeks after I put it in, and that was the end of that one. The one thing with these, they work good. They've got a battery in them that needs replaced every few years. They don't have an on-off switch. So, well, that's one has an on-off switch. The older ones didn't, and so you were kind of exciting to get them turned on and off. I bought 2 of these last year. They're really pretty nice. From Kenco. They've got a slot on the back of them. They can drive a T-post in. They drop down on a T-post. They've got a little light to show you that it's working. This is a solar charger. And the connections are back here. It's also got the ability, you can take it in the house and plug it into your wall. It's got a little charger. It takes about a day to charge it up. So if you didn't have any sun or anything. The other thing is you're not going to use these in the winter, particularly up around Erie where the snow gets deep and electric fences don't work in the winter. I saw the Game Commission's website. They have a bear cam of a bear that's dead, and the cubs were pretty lively last night, and so the bears will be coming out in the next few weeks. They'll be hungry. They haven't eaten for a while. This looks just like the mains charger we saw. It's a 1 output or 1 joule output, and then they list 25 miles of fence. You can hook this up to a deep cycle battery, but it's hard on the batteries. Deep cycle batteries shouldn't be discharged a whole lot, or you'll be buying new ones. So, but it's the cheapest one you can buy if you've got a battery sitting around. This is just a little engineering blather on the numbers involved in a charger. The things you want to look at here are the voltage and the resistance. If you take a ohm meter that measures the resistance, you can put it between your 2 thumbs and you'll measure 10 to 30,000 ohms resistance. And that determines how much of a hit you're going to get. And if you had a large charger, and it would show you'd be getting 2 joules. But if you happen to put your wet nose and your chin in a fence and you were down to maybe 100 ohms, the numbers suggest you're going to get a pretty good hit. The chargers, like I said, the one was rated at 13 joules. This is what you could potentially get. You're going to get everything, and it'll hurt. It'll hurt. Kind of like getting stung by a bee, though. It hurts, but it doesn't kill you as long as it's one sting. Charger size. What's important is more than anything else with your charger and your fence is you have to keep the fence that's got the voltage on it isolated. If you have grass growing up and getting on your fence or stick laying down, the voltage will be shunted off through that grass or the stick, and you can buy instruments that measure the voltage on your fence. And if you've got these shorts from dead grass or live grass, you'll be seeing uh, voltages of around 1500, 2000 volts, they're not going to deter anything. So you have to keep your fence clean. That's more important. We'll be getting through this pretty quick, and I'll skip down. These are some of the tools that you need for high T fencing. These are some of the posts and post driving techniques for wooden posts. Very expensive. Wooden posts are going to be expensive for you. This is the fence. This is how you would connect the fence. I don't know why they have a negative in here, but what you do is you put jumpers between each of these. This is a fence with the ground plane. You can use as a ground plane. You can use a wire, chicken wire, sheet of aluminum siding, something like that. This is the important slide of the whole thing. For those of us that got small bee yards, this shows the composite posts with the cattle panels. These are 16 foot. And notice they put the charger outside their fence, which is a good place for it because I saw the Penn State one was inside. You got to reach inside and shut this thing off. Notice, though, they've got dead grass all around here. This is really important so you don't have the grass shorting your fence out. This whole fence is hot. So a small animal trying to get underneath will get shocked. A big bear, these are pretty stiff. They're not going to damage. These are composite posts. You have some difficulty if you use wood posts or anything like that. I was asked one question before we started about what do you do when a bear gets inside? Probably let it have its way. It'll probably, if you go over, it'll run away. I've been very close to very many bears. They're afraid of you, black bears. The only exception might be is if it's a sow with cubs and she thinks you're endangering her cubs. And the other thing, bears in Pennsylvania grow to 600, 800 pounds. If one of them runs you over because you're in the way, it's probably going to hurt. But I called the Game Commission and asked some questions to them. Those of you that are commercial, they may pay for your fencing, they may pay for damages, but your land has to be open to public hunting. They have a very limited budget for payouts, and a minimum of 10 hives will they protect. Any smaller than that, you're very considered a hobby. And they have a whole bunch of other rules. And shooting a bear is probably not a good option. The phone number's there, you can call them, and they were very, very interesting to talk to. But that's it. Any questions?
That's good. There was a lot of information there. I want to thank you. I know a lot of people do have bear fences up. It's always a reoccurring problem, especially if you live near any kind of moving water or valley or whatever. So, Charlie, you've been attacked by bears, haven't you?
Oh, over the years, it seemed like you get an average of one every once in a while. I haven't for a while.
Say it was early November. Historically, there's been some differences in how the Game Commission handles bear complaints region to region. There's also it's an outdated information as far as recommended fencing, et cetera. And as you guys know, there's a lot of variations as far as fencing is concerned. So we came to a consensus with the Game Commission, and we're actually working on putting together a multi-page booklet that will be handed out to their game wardens to hand out to beekeepers as they see fit. We're also going to get them bulk or mass produced so that we have them available through the state association. Essentially, it'll be a large book that talks about fencing guidelines, the recommended fencing by the Game Commission and the PSBA, how to handle bear complaints in Pennsylvania, what you can't do, etc. It was interesting to see that last slide about the Northwest region, because in other regions, hive number doesn't matter. You could have one hive, you could have 1,000, you're still going to get potentially reimbursed. But as he mentioned, there is a short budget, etc. So the good news is we're working on it. I have a call into them. I'm supposed to have a phone call with the executive director on Monday. Was today Saturday? Yeah. So Monday and we're going to see where we are. They offered to do the printing and everything, and we're just collaborating with them to put together this booklet. So it'll probably be 10 or 15 pages. It'll be an actual book, but it should be a good resource for beekeepers all across the Commonwealth.